his dad was a wreck. During his stay in the Underland, which was what the inhabitants called it, he'd been starved, deprived of light, and physically abused in ways he would never discuss. He was tormented by nightmares, and at times he had trouble separating reality from illusion, even when he was awake. This was worse when he was feverish, which was often, because despite repeated trips to the doctor, he could not shake off a strange illness he'd brought back from the Underland. Before Gregor had fallen after Boots through a grate in the laundry room and helped rescue his dad, he'd always thought that everything would be simple once his family was reunited. It was 1,000 times better having his dad back, Gregor knew that, but it was not simple. Gregor moved quietly into the kitchen and slid the roach into the trash. He set the jar on the counter and noticed it was bare. The fridge held half a carton of milk, a gallon bottle of apple juice with maybe 1 glassful in it, and a jar of mustard. Gregor braced himself and opened the cabinet. Half a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, and a box of oatmeal. He gave the box of oatmeal a shake and exhaled in relief. There was enough food for breakfast and lunch. And since it was Saturday, Gregor wouldn't even need to eat at home. He'd be going over to help Mrs. Cormacy. Mrs. Cormacy. It was strange how in a few short months she had changed from being their nosy neighbor into a kind of guardian angel. Shortly after Gregor, Boots, and their dad had returned from the Underland, he'd run into her in the hallway. "So, where have you been, mister?" she asked him, "besides scaring the whole building to death?" Gregor had given her the story his family had agreed upon. On the day he'd disappeared from the laundry room, he'd taken Boots out to the playground to play for a few minutes. They'd run into his dad, who was on his way to see his sick uncle in Virginia and wanted to take the kids with him. Gregor thought his dad had called his mom. His dad thought Gregor had called his mom. It wasn't until they got back that they realized what a crisis they'd caused. Said Mrs. Cormacy, giving him a hard look. "I thought your father was living in California." "He was," said Gregor, "but now he's back with us." "I see," Mrs. Cormacy again. "So that's your story." Gregor nodded, knowing it was pretty lame. Said Mrs. Cormacy again. "Well, I'd work on that if I were you." And she walked off without another word. Gregor thought she was mad at them, but a few days later, she'd knocked on the door with a coffee cake. "I brought your father a coffee cake," she said. "It's a welcome-home thing. Is he here?" He hadn't wanted to let her in, but his dad called out in a false, cheerful voice, "Is that Mrs. Cormacy?" And she bustled right in with her cake. The sight of his dad, bone-thin, white-haired, hunched over on the couch, pulled her up short. If she had planned to interrogate him, she let it go right there. Instead, she exchanged a few comments about the weather and left. Then, a couple of weeks after school started, his mom came in one evening with some news. "Mrs. Cormacy wants to hire you to help her on Saturdays," she said. "Help her?" Gregor asked warily. "Help her do what?" He didn't want to help Mrs. Cormacy. She'd ask him a bunch of questions and probably want to read his future with her deck of tarot cards and... "I don't know. Help her around her apartment. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. But I thought it might be a nice way for you to make some pocket money," said his mom. And Gregor knew then that he would do it, and forget about pocket money, forget about money for movies and comic books and stuff. He'd use the money for his family, because even though his dad was home, there was no way he could go back to his job as a science teacher. He had only left the apartment a few times, and that was to go to the doctor. The 6 of them were living on what his mom could make, and with the medical bills and school supplies and clothes and food and rent and every other thing you had to have to live, it wasn't stretching far enough. "What time does she want me there?" asked Gregor. She said 10 would be good, said his mom. That first Saturday, several months ago, there hadn't been much food in the apartment either, so Gregor had just gulped down a couple of glasses of water and headed over to Mrs. Cormacy's. When she opened the door, the rich smell of something amazing hit him, filling his mouth with so much saliva that he had to swallow hard before he said hi. "Oh, good you came," said Mrs. Cormacy. "Follow me." Feeling awkward, Gregor followed her into her kitchen. A gigantic pot of sauce was bubbling away on the stove. Another pot contained lasagna noodles. Piles of vegetables covered the counter. "There's a fundraiser tonight at my church, and I said I'd bring lasagna. Don't ask me why." Mrs. Cormacy dumped several ladles of sauce into a bowl, stuck a big wedge of bread in it, clunked it on the table, and pushed Gregor into a chair before it. "Taste it." Gregor looked at her, unsure. "Taste it. I have to know if it's fit to be served," insisted Mrs. Cormacy. He dipped the bread into the sauce and took a bite. It was so good his eyes watered. "Boy," he said when he had swallowed. "You hate it. It's revolting. I should throw the whole pot out and go buy jar sauce from the grocery," said Mrs. Cormacy. "No," said Gregor, alarmed. "No, it's the best sauce I ever tasted." Mrs. Cormacy slapped a spoon down beside him. "Then eat it and wash your hands with soap because you've got chopping to do." After he'd inhaled the sauce and bread, she set him to work chopping piles of vegetables that she sautéed in olive oil. He mixed eggs and spices into ricotta cheese, then layered big, flat noodles and cheese and sauce and vegetables into 3 enormous pans. He helped her wash up, and she declared it was time for lunch. They had tuna salad sandwiches in her dining room while Mrs. Cormacy talked about her 3 kids, who were all grown and lived in different states, and Mr. Cormacy, who'd passed away 5 years ago. Gregor vaguely remembered him as a nice man who had given him quarters and, one time, a baseball card. "Not a day goes by that I don't miss him," said Mrs. Cormacy. Then she brought out a pound cake. After lunch, Gregor helped her clean out a closet and carried a few boxes down to her storage space. At 2:00, she said he was done. She had not asked any questions about him except how he liked school. She sent him out the door with $40, a winter coat that had belonged to her daughter when she was little, and a lasagna. When he tried to object, she just said, "I can't take 3 lasagnas to the fundraiser. People take 2. You walk in with 3 and everybody thinks you're a big show-off, and what? I'm going to eat it? With my cholesterol? Take it, eat it. Go, I'll see you next Saturday." And she closed the door in his face. It was too much. All of it. But he could surprise his mom and buy groceries, and maybe some light bulbs, since 3 lamps were out in the house. Lizzie needed a coat. And the lasagna. Somehow, that was the best part of all. Suddenly, he wanted to knock on the door and tell Mrs. Cormacy the truth about the Underland and everything that had happened, and that he was sorry that he had lied to her. But he couldn't. Gregor was jolted out of his memory when Lizzie padded into the kitchen in her pajamas. She was small for her age, but the look of concern on her face made her look older than 7. "Is there any food for today?" she asked. "Sure, there's plenty," said Gregor, trying to sound like he hadn't been worried himself. "Look, you guys can have this oatmeal for breakfast and peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. I'll go ahead and make the oatmeal now." Lizzie wasn't allowed to use the stove, but she opened the cabinet with the bowls. She counted out 4, and then hesitated. "Are you eating breakfast, or—" "Nah, I'm not even hungry this morning," he said, even though his stomach was growling. "Besides,